Hi, nice to meet you. I know you're muted. I'm just going to introduce myself real quick, and maybe I'll pass the mic to you, give you a chance, and then we'll get started. Good? My name is Mark Johnson. I'm going to be defending Obama and trying to point out why I think he's a good president. And I plan on addressing this pragmatically as best I can. I'll pass it off to you.
Hello, my name is Logan Fleckenstein. I'm going to be pretty much arguing why Obama's presidency wasn't what could be deemed really effective or successful. I'll warn you. I mean, I'm not afraid to get semantical with some stuff, but I think that's just kind of an important part of an argument. So I think that's going to probably be a huge part before really we get into like what he's done and what he hasn't done and vice versa.
All right, thanks. I think we should start off just talking about what the president does for the most part. Essentially, he's the commander-in-chief. His job is to make sure that, he kind of runs America like a business, making sure that, he is dealing with domestic issues, taking care of the budget, making sure law enforcement is behaving, civil rights aren't being overwhelmed. And he's also responsible for our military. So there's going to be a lot of conversations, I think, about policing, banks, our economy, and all of the various wars that we're involved in. So I'd like to start by talking about his failures and accomplishments in terms of how various people see him. We have to sort of look at the way a staunch conservative might look at him and think, he failed us. Those climate regulations have been ruining our business. Obamacare is a mess. If you look at it from a conservative standpoint, you'll see a lot of criticism. Democrats and liberals will say similar things, but he'll talk about how the banks got off too easy, or that we're in perpetual war and drone strikes, et cetera. If you're a libertarian, you'll be upset at the way he's locked up whistleblowers. There's a number of complaints here from all sides. And what's interesting is that we all have these opinions, but essentially they are opinion based on how we understand the facts. And they are biased according to what we consider to be what we want. However, when we look at the president and his job, he is responsible for all of us. So that means the conservatives, the Green Party people, everyone. And he's trying to manage that whole population and give us all necessarily what we would want. So I think that's a very important aspect to look at. A lot of times when you hear, he's a failure and he's failed and he's a problem, it uses opinion polls. Essentially, they'll go to a number of people that they select and they'll find that people were against him because he did these things. For instance, Blaze asked a question if most Americans wanted Congress to reject the Iran deal. 54% said yes, they should reject it. The Iran deal is a bad thing. So those are all great, but those are all opinion. I think for us to have any kind of sanity, we need to be pragmatic about this and look at the facts. I'll get into facts a little bit more later, but I think I'm going to pass it back to you and get your response and maybe a little bit about your side of things.
Thank you. So my biggest thing, I guess, coming from why I'm trying to argue that he is not effective or successful is, first of all, when it comes to effectiveness, that's not even a matter of opinion. That actually is a matter of pragmatism. And I think when we look at the timeline of the events that occurred during his entire, 8 terms, hasn't really been until like the last couple of years that he's really been doing stuff that's been agreeable, been quite the controversial figure amongst, like you said, amongst the American people. And I think the fact that he hasn't been able to, that there's been still so much more divisiveness and division. That is an important role of the president. I mean, objectively speaking, we can see that he has not been successful to the point where, Trump's now elected. That should show you that he has not been effective or successful, at least the eyes of the majority of the people. And I think that's at least something to consider. Maybe that's not like the only tier to say that's a successful administration is the opinion of the people, but that is certainly one of them. And really, I mean, let's look at the first couple years of his administration, where it's Obamacare, really. I mean, you look back at it, and this despite having a Democratic House and Senate. So he had full party support potentially, but it was so unpopular, even his own party didn't really care for it. And now it's obviously become a big mess and is exploded in the face of people. Small businesses are getting hurt the most by it too. And so he's really, even as a progressive, he's been, I think, not effective at all. If he really meant what he said by what he promised and set out, I think compared to what it's actually been done, you can see that they don't match up. And it'd be one thing if he had came out and just said, hey, I'm sorry, my campaign promises were unrealistic. I didn't know about some other factors, blah, blah, blah. And now I can't do these things because of those. Instead, he's just saying, no, I'm not doing these things. And it's really been blatant, because I think he understands that he just that he can't get it done. He hasn't been able to get it done, and that's because I think a lot of it wasn't necessarily his fault. That is what I will be willing to argue. Wouldn't even be willing to argue that he wasn't necessarily going to be a good president per se, and that he wasn't, in that sense, like a lot of conservatives and even a lot of my fellow libertarians do. I just want to argue that when you break it down to its fine, despite opinion. So I like that that's the direction we're going with this, because I agree with that assessment, despite the opinions of where you may be, on the ideological scale. Obama hasn't been able to steer Congress into really compromising with him much on things, and he hasn't been able to unify people. Really think about, I remember, for example, Bill Clinton. You could argue he was, despite what you may think of his policies and how they worked out, the fact he was able to push them through with a Republican House and do so very well. That's an example of an effective president. And I just don't see with what the timeline of the events have gone down with what we have now. I just don't see how you could argue it being effective and pragmatic. And the successful, I think, is more of subjective. So we can get to it.
Thank you. So, listening to what you said, you had a lot of opinion. I didn't really hear numbers, didn't hear statistics. I didn't hear specifics. And I think if we're going to be pragmatic here, I think we need to look at those, because I agree. If you look at the opinions, he's got 80% approval on the Democrat side, but it's down to 20% for Republicans. So he's definitely polarizing. And you might have noticed that presidents have gotten more and more polarizing. But if you looked at Bush, or if you look at statistics on both Bushes, you'll see them drop. Both of them really drop as they got near the end of their term. Nixon's another example of someone who dropped dramatically. What you'll notice with Obama is that as much as there's a split, generally there is a lot of support in his party. And regardless of what opinions we have about other people's opinions, we can look at specific things about our economy. For one, I have a list here. I wrote down the unemployment rate's gone below 6%. We brought the housing market back from the dead. It was really rough, and now it's just going like gangbusters. The stock market's double. We brought our car industry back from the brink. That was in danger. The banks were in trouble. He bailed those banks out, and they paid us back with interest. So all the people that said, yeah, that's terrible, worked. Whatever he did worked. So there's a lot of specifics that we can talk about in how he was able to save our economy. That's, he created over 13 million jobs during his administration, and that's huge. The man has done incredible work there. But again, we can't give him credit for everything. He is not the king. He can't just do whatever he wants and have it come across. He has to consider what the American people want, what's going on in the rest of the world, and he's got to think about what his Congress is going to do. Thankfully, in the first couple of years, he had a strong position. He was able to push the ACA through. He wasn't able to get Obamacare through because that would have been a single payer, a much more socialist kind of agenda. And the reason he couldn't is because he had to compromise. It's not so much the audacity of hope, but the audacity of compromise on his part. I think if you're on the left, you're disappointed. But if you're on the right, you saw that he kind of shifted a little bit toward you. If you're an insurance company, you're very pleased because generally he hasn't ruined your business at all. And indeed, he's helped you. He's also helped people. We have 75% of our country is now insured. That's a good thing. If you understand the long game here, insurance coverage, preventative care is far more efficient and effective than it would be if we just handle things at the last minute with emergency care. So as disappointing as it is that we're forced into it in order to be able to sort of meet the market need to cover these people, there is a part of me that sees the long-term gain for all of us as citizens. As we get older, the importance of Medicare expansion, which also helped that. So those are kind of some of the main kind of economic points. We've also extended diplomatically a far greater image of America through his role as a figurehead than we ever had with Bush. Not only did we inherit a really difficult situation, which I think you'd be aware of economically, we also had not a very great public opinion from the rest of the world on America. We saw us all as these sort of, warmongering kind of not very environmentally thoughtful people. And I know that from, interviewing people that I know in Europe over the years. And, I've been through this. I went through Reagan. I went through both Bushes. And you'll be happy to know I've been a registered libertarian since I was 18. But as I've aged, I've gotten a little bit more open to the idea of certain programs like UBI, et cetera. So what we have here is a pragmatic president in a very difficult time who's been able to kind of ignore a lot of the opinion and focus directly on what is going to help us as Americans. He got us out of 2 wars. That's good. And that took a while. He killed Osama bin Laden. That's kind of huge. No one else could do it until him. So now that's assuming that you are, a big fan of America being like the world police and the greatest country in the world. And if you're a nationalist kind of minded person, those all sound like really good things. On the lefty kind of side of things, you could say, oh, well, he's just keeping things going. He's maintaining the power of this country. But isn't that really his job? I mean, he is the president of the United States. And unless the American people finally decide that, hey, maybe the environment's better than war and maybe we don't need to have all this excess, until American people change their mind, it's really not his responsibility to tell us what to do. He has tried to influence us. He's talked about the environment a great deal. He's made very specific changes to the environment. He's pushed for green jobs, which has been huge. He's worked with the rest of the world. So we have, various initiatives that we have held on to, which may be thrown out if we're not careful, considering the administration that's coming in. So these are all statistical, valuable things that I think have helped America. I think I'll stop there and give you a chance to reply.
All right. So I understand where you're coming from in terms of trying to be understanding and trying to be open and objective in your thought process of, okay, what Obama had to deal with versus what he's had to promise, versus all these other factors, what's the typical of being the president and whatnot. But you have to I think it's kind of important when we're thinking about effective and successful presidents that we do have to consider, what they're promising, what they're saying they're going to do versus what they actually do. Because if we don't, I think as a society really have that as at least one important part of what's successful or not, that's going to be detrimental, because then politicians can just get away with lying and saying whatever they want, promising whatever they want, and then just getting into office because that's a norm. And I see, and that's why I don't want to. I really think that's an important part, and a really important like stain on his administration. That's going to be really hard to ignore and scrub away as time goes on. And you could argue, yes, he's had some forms of short-term economic success, but whether these are going to go into the long-term success or not, that's still debatable. Especially with now, for example, this bailout. The problem even isn't necessarily that, yes, they paid us back. It's now that there's a precedent that's set that they can now do that. This is okay, and that's not good. And that's not good, because yes, maybe this time they pay us back. Maybe they paid us back. What happens next time if they can't? That means the American taxpayer is going to be then stuck with that bill. So I think you have to look at a lot of these precedents that he's been setting, or at least continuing, and really put that in consideration for when we say, is this presidency effective and successful? Because really what I'm really hearing, what I think a lot of your arguments can be really boiled down to, is that he is doing his thing. He's doing okay. And okay, in my opinion, isn't the same as effective and successful. Successful means, a great presidency. And when we think of great presidencies, like the top tier presidents, objectively speaking, that despite whether the left, right, libertarian, what have you, and those are going to obviously vary because of ideological differences, but just in terms of like commander-in-chief executive personas, we don't really, Obama's not going to be on that list. He hasn't dealt, a lot of it's because he hasn't dealt with like major like 9/11 crisis like Bush did, or he dealing with a Pearl Harbor. He's just been continuing a lot of wars, and yeah, I made sure he helped kind of slow down a little bit, a couple of them, but a lot of other places he helped escalate them, like in Iraq, for example. And not to mention, foreign policy wise, we're going to talk about that. We can't, whether you're on the left, right, or whatever, killing innocent human lives is pretty unsuccessful, pretty ineffective, and it's only perpetuating more terrorism and more violence and whatnot. And that is what's been happening under his drone strike program. He's been escalating it, and you could argue, well, that's maybe because the generals kind of irked him towards it, or it's because of this and because of that. And it doesn't matter really why it happened at the end of the day. The fact is, it happened under his administration, so it is his responsibility. So that's the issue. Really, is becoming what we're defining, like what we're going to define each of his things as being good or bad. Yes, I'll agree. He's done a couple good things. I'm not saying he's like the worst president of all time, and I don't think either of us have to even really argue that. Like, I don't think you have to argue that he's the greatest president of all time. I'm not going to say you have to argue that. I understand in order to say he's a good president, he could just even be not bad. But I think when you look at what he has promised versus what he's been able to deliver, it's not good. It's not good. He's definitely failed, and that's why Trump won. I think Trump winning is a sign that his policies overall have not been successful. Because if they really were, I think he would have won. I think that much of the Rust Belt would have not have betrayed him. And there's a reason, and they have all the reason in the world to want to just continue Democrats, because Democrats very typically are the more Rust Belt friendly people. When we look at the unions and all that, at least we're going to the typical status quo way of thinking. Why would they then turn around and vote for Trump if Obama had done well? that's where I think we have to look at what is actually happening versus what we intellectually think and theoretically think is good versus bad. And I think when you look at the actions of what is happening, it's clear that this is evidence that of really not really a successful presidency, an okay presidency, but not a successful presidency.
Thanks. I'm going to hit a couple of your points. For one, you're saying that he increased our military in these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and actually he didn't. He pulled out. So he's not necessarily responsible unless you think him pulling out was what increased the activities. Obviously, ISIS grew when we pulled out. I was against both wars, the first time and the second time in Iraq. So however he did it, he was able to pull out and with minimal harm to American citizens. Talking a little bit about how, let's say Jesse Owens was trying to run, a 100-meter dash and, he was wearing a 50-pound backpack on him, right? You would say, this guy can't run. It took him 13 seconds. That's ridiculous. He's a terrible runner. I think we really need to look at the situation that Obama inherited. It was the possibilities for disaster were incredible. At no point did we have to worry about any major terrorist attack. There were definitely shootings that happened. There were, bursts, but we didn't have a giant building blow up like we did under Bush. We didn't have thousands of people die like that. He was able to really take care of the American people and protect us and make us feel safe. I think one of the things you've touched on when you talk about Trump is that we have a lot of people that are forming their opinions based on opinions, not on facts, but on the opinions of others. He is the kind of guy who sort of ignores a lot of that stuff and just tries to focus on the job. I could give you a huge list of things that he's accomplished. I'll post it later. I looked at an article and it was a 400 Obama accomplishments so far with citations so far. And it's huge. It's ridiculous how much this guy has done. When he first started, he was all about cutting waste in the White House. So he made all these policy changes. He reduced it so people wouldn't be getting raises. He locked out lobbyists. He made it so that his administration would be open and transparent. Again, you kind of mentioned he didn't keep his promises, but you didn't say a single thing that he said he was going to do that he couldn't. I can remember, obviously, that he made a lot of promises about, closing Gitmo and doing what he could to bring about, universal health care. There were a lot of things that he was, pushing for, and there was a lot of excitement about that, and he wasn't able to do it when he became president. Now, I think he had a reasonable assumption that he might be able to do it. They weren't ridiculous claims like building a wall or any of those things. But based on Trump, you can see that people really are gullible. The American people are largely polarized. More people on the left and the right will vote than people in the center. So you've got a lot of people that have kind of come to these very strong opinions, and their bias is getting more and more set. I think as a libertarian, you might get a sense of, you can look at things on both sides. From a non-authoritarian position, it's easy to kind of see the authoritarianism that comes from the left and the right. And I think we can look at those issues and be concerned. So in large ways, yes, he wasn't able to do everything he could do. But remember, as soon as he was elected, the GOP made it very clear that they were going to resist him. They were going to resist him as hard as he could. And in those first 4 years, he fought that. He thankfully had enough in the first few years, enough power to be able to kind of push things through. But after that, he was gridlocked. And even then, he was able to push a lot through. So you've got to really consider all the blocks that were against him. And I think this is a larger comment on how all of our politics are done. It'd be nice if we could all kind of agree on 10 things so we could all just move forward instead of this constant back and forth. You've got Bush who just, drains the economy down to where we're in real trouble. And then you got him who picks it up. And then you get Trump, who gets to inherit this amazing economy. And it's just kind of going back and forth. It would be great if we could all just sort of agree on some stuff. We got to look at social issues for one. I mean, look at, gay rights. You've got people that are able to be out in the military. That there's no more of that don't ask, don't tell. They can be married. You can see a lot more liberty in various states. Generally, I think he's respected the federalism. He gives states' rights a certain value. He's backed off on weed, marijuana laws for the most part. Initially, I think there were a lot of federal busts when we were going in various states. I'm in California when we got medical. And a lot of those were warranted because there was a lot of other shady stuff going on in some of those places. He just recently, now, in the end, like you said, he's kind of really coming out and getting stronger in the end here, released a lot of nonviolent offenders from prison. And I very much appreciate that. It'd be great if he could, help Snowden and give these guys a break. These are people that, the whistleblower stuff I don't necessarily agree with, but again, we're dealing with the American people and what they want. And the American people are scared. They were scared from 9/11. They're afraid of terrorism, and they're willing to sort of give up a lot of their personal freedoms because of that fear. I think Trump really plays on that, and Trump will probably take it further and take advantage. I think there's a lot of ways that Obama could have really taken advantage of us with the powers that he has, the powers that have kind of increased in his office. And he's remained steadfast. He's held back. I'm going to cut back because I want to give you a little time and you can respond. If you want to do like 2-2 or something, I got about 4 minutes left.
Okay. Yeah, we can do some 2-2s. That's fine. So I think really when trying to wrap around, I'm not trying to get too specific with trying to make it too much about this sheer opinion of policy, particular policies per se, and just in terms of overall, what are we thinking of when we think of when calling someone an effective president, like the Mount Rushmore of presidents? Would he be some sort of person that's going to be a Mount Rushmore president? I think we can both agree, probably not. Is he going to be a certain president? Is he going to be like maybe right below that tier, like in third tiers, and that's why I think we have to start thinking about in terms of what we're going to have this sort of debate of effective and successful. And part of it has to be part of it does have to be looking at policies and individual policies, and I think a lot of it is going to vary in opinion. So it's very difficult to separate the opinion from it, because, for example, when you're talking about foreign policy, I would argue that because of this drone strike program that he's been escalating, or at least hasn't slowed down under his administration, or he's failed to slow down, whatever his motives are, that's beside the point for this argument. It's statistically true that these drone strike programs are going to make more terrorism happen. More people die. That's going to be more pissed off people, and that's going to be more people that are going to want to take out their frustrations on America and on the West in general. Look at this. Look at this with refugees now. There is this sort of culture. There is becoming more and more so a cultural rift between the Middle East and the West. And I know it's always been there. It's not like this is new. I understand this. A lot of these, we all know Obama inherited a bunch of problems. And I think most presidents, especially modern day presidents, arguably inherited a bunch of problems. There wasn't really one that kind of got easy. They all had their obstacles to deal with. In terms of Bush, like with 9/11, there's not really much he probably could have actually done. It was just a lot of happenstance and bad timing, unless you believe in the conspiracy theory. Then yes, he's then probably vile in your opinion. But assuming it for a moment, it wasn't that. Assuming it's just your mainstream, box cutter terrorist. That's just such a wild thing to have happen anyways, that I think that's just something hard to really prepare for. I mean, you don't really expect that to ever really happen. It just sounds on its face so absurd. So I think, but I think, yeah, you could argue whether Bush handled it well or not, though, doesn't really help to the point of whether Obama's effective or not. Whether Republicans themselves have done good or bad, that doesn't really argue one way or another of how well Obama has done. We have to kind of just do it based on what he has been willing to do and what he's been willing to push. And yes, I think he's done some of his policies now, especially releasing some of the non-violent offenders, some of his criminal justice reform. It's just a little. It's just a little. Not enough, and it really wasn't, or was not really willing to really pass the olive branch in that and actually work with them. I think says a lot about his administration. Yes, I'm not going to say the Republicans were cooperative. I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to defend the Republicans. I'm the last guy that would ever do that. But I think when in terms of Obama, he still has a blame. I would even be willing to grant that maybe Republicans get more to blame. I could be okay with it, but Obama still deserves a lot of this blame. Look at, with Obamacare, yes, millions of people now have health insurance, but now millions of people also have to pay extraordinary fines for not having health insurance. I know plenty of anecdotal stories of people saying, "Oh, I have to